We live in a world that's changing at lightning speed, right? But what about the classroom? Has it kept up? For a lot of us, when we picture school, we still see a teacher up at a blackboard. Today, we're going to look at a totally different model, one that puts the student right in the center of their own learning.
And just so you know, this isn't just a bunch of random ideas. We're basing this whole explainer on academic course material from Dr. Sefdade Ansa at the University of Education in Winneba. We're going to be drawing straight from his work on the principles of modern teaching.
All right, so let's start with the big question. Why bother changing the classroom at all? Well, it really boils down to this, shifting from just passively listening to actively doing. And that move is absolutely essential if we want to create real, lasting understanding.
I mean, think back to when you were in school. Teacher at the front, you're in a row of desks, trying your best to listen. Maybe. Sound familiar? That model's been around for hundreds of years. But with everything we know now about how our brains actually learn, you have to ask, is it really the best we can do?
The answer, it turns out, is a powerful new perspective. It's all about putting the student at the very heart of the whole learning process. So it's not just about absorbing information anymore. It's about actively going out and discovering it. And educators have a name for this: integrated pedagogy.
So, what does this actually look like in a real classroom? Well, one of the foundational methods is called guided discovery. And the name kind of gives it away, right? It's all about exploration, but with the teacher there to provide the map and compass. A psychologist named Jerome Bruner was a huge proponent of this. The idea is simple. Students use what they already know as a kind of launch pad to figure out new concepts. But that word guided is key. This is not about just leaving kids to figure it all out alone. The teacher's role here is more important than ever. You see, it's more of a cycle than a straight line. It all kicks off with questions, building on what students bring to the table. Then you get this social group learning thing going, where learning becomes iterative, a process of trying something, thinking about it, and trying again. The how you learn becomes just as important as the what. And the payoff for the student? It's huge. Because when you figure something out for yourself, you own it. And that ownership, that's what sparks real motivation. It makes learning fun, genuinely interesting, and it builds those critical thinking skills that are so vital in the world today. Okay, so building on that idea of active discovery, some methods use problems and questions as the actual engine for learning. This approach basically turns the classroom into a kind of laboratory for solving real-world challenges. So first, we've got the big umbrella term, inquiry-based learning. Here, instead of starting with a chapter of facts to memorize, you might start with a really compelling question. Something like, how could we design a more sustainable city? The whole learning process then becomes a quest to find the answer. Now, within that broader category, there's a much more focused and structured approach. And it's one that's become super popular in really demanding fields like medicine or engineering, where knowing how to solve a problem is every bit as important as just knowing the facts. And yeah, the source material is crystal clear on this. Problem-based learning, or PBL for short, really takes the spirit of inquiry and just applies it to a very specific real-world problem. It's inquiry in action. And here's how it works. It all starts with a genuine, real-life problem. Then, students get into small groups and go through these investigative cycles. They're not just looking for an answer, they're actually learning the strategies for how to solve problems in the first place. So, what if we take this one step further? If problem-based learning is about finding a solution, our next method, project-based learning, is all about building it. This is where knowledge gets tangible. It gets real. Students aren't just answering questions on a worksheet, they are creating something. A presentation, a product, maybe even an event. They're learning the curriculum by actually applying it to a complex, long-term project. Now, for this to really work, it has to be built on these 5 pillars. The project isn't some fun little dessert you get at the end of the unit. No, the project is the unit. It's got to be student-driven, built around real investigation, and grounded in a challenge that feels authentic. And you're probably seeing a pattern with the benefits here, right? But there may be even stronger with this approach. Higher-order thinking, better social skills, and a massive boost in engagement. I mean, when learning has a clear purpose and a real outcome, students are just naturally going to be more invested. So, by now, you've probably spotted the common thread running through all of these different methods. They don't just change what the student is doing, they completely transform the role of the teacher. And this is the absolute core of it all. The teacher shifts from being the sage on the stage, the one person who has all the knowledge,
to the guide on the side. Their main job is no longer to just transmit information, but to design learning experiences that empower students to discover that information for themselves.
And make no mistake, this is a very active role. The teacher starts by making the goals crystal clear. Then they provide support and structure. Educators call this scaffolding. And then they step back to monitor and mentor. Even how we assess learning changes, focusing less on one-off tests and more on things like portfolios that show growth over time.
This quote from our source material just sums it up perfectly. The teacher becomes a coach, a facilitator, a conflict resolver, a mentor. It's an incredibly demanding role for sure, but also an incredibly rewarding way to teach.
Which leaves us with one final, really important question. If we have the blueprint for how to build better learners, what's it going to take to build the classrooms and schools where this kind of learning can actually happen for everyone? The answer to that is going to define the future of education. Thanks so much for diving into this with me.